Okay, so today we're going to be doing a couple of things. We're going to be finishing the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel as we have it arranged in our Bibles. We're going to be starting the book of 2 Samuel. But we're also going to be looking at a section in the book of 1 Chronicles. So, and I will talk about that a little bit once we start that. So let's go ahead and read the last chapter of 1 Samuel, which is about the end of Saul. Saul has finally reached the end of his line. He has been fighting against God for I don't know how long at this point. He was the first anointed king. He failed to live up to God's standards as king, so God replaced him with somebody else. But rather than accept this reality and step aside, Saul continued to fight. He fought God, he fought David, he fought for his throne, he fought for his kingship, and he's going to end up losing it all. He's going to take his family down with him. Last night, the previous night before this, he was told by the ghost of Samuel that he and his sons, Saul and his sons, were going to be with Samuel that time the following day. By that time the following day, which means they're going to be dead. They're going to be in Sheol, the underworld, where the dead people are. And that's going to happen here. Now, the Philistines fought against Israel. We've been setting this up for a couple of chapters now. We're finally getting around to this battle that they're having. We don't know really what their circumstances are surrounding this particular fight. The text did not go into detail. The text did not go into detail about what prompted this particular battle, but it's happening. The Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. So Jonathan is not going to be David's second in command. At least not literally. Maybe in some figurative spiritual sense, David always thinks about Jonathan when he makes his executive decisions as king. Who knows? But Jonathan did not end up being David's second in command. He was willing to give up Jonathan would have been the king if Saul's dynasty had continued. Jonathan himself acknowledged that was not going to happen and David was going to be the king, but he thought, or he wanted to be David's second in command, and that's not going to happen. Jonathan is going to have to die for Saul's mistakes. Jonathan is not going to be able to stick around in a post-Saul world, and that's just how it is. It's not fair, probably. I guess it's unfortunate. Jonathan was not the bad guy. Jonathan was as much of a victim, in fact, as anyone. In fact, possibly the main victim of anyone, but that's just how it is. The fighting grew fierce around Saul. And when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. You just have to bother me all the time. Just all the time, you have to bother me. It's so annoying. Saul said to his armor bearer, so he is wounded. He's bleeding. He's wounded. I don't know how disabled he is, but apparently this is a mortal wound, so he's bleeding out from something, some wound somewhere on his body. Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me or torture me. But his armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. You stay right here. This is a good place for you. This is a good place for you, cat. You stay right here. But his armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. So he was still physically capable of doing that, at least. I don't know where he got wounded or to what degree his wound disabled his movements, but he was still physically capable of falling on his own sword. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. When the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled, and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. So this is a total defeat. This is a total disaster here. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreth, and fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. When the people of Jabesh-Gilead heard of what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men journeyed through the night to Beth-shan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Beth-shan, and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. Then they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. Jabesh-Gilead, of course, is where Saul had close family ties. You're not going all the way back to the end of the book of Judges. Jabesh-Gilead is where a number of the Benjamite survivors of the Benjamin-Israel Civil War got their wives from. So in Saul's day, quite a few of the Benjamites would have been intermingled with the descendants of Jabesh-Gilead, and Saul himself had rescued the citizens of Jabesh-Gilead from the king of the Ammonites earlier. So they have a loyalty to Saul, and they're not going to let the Philistines abuse his remains like this any longer. Okay, we're going to read now the First Chronicles account of Saul's death. Now, we're not going to read the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles today. I'm not sure. I honestly don't know if I'm ever going to get around to reading the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles in these videos. I just don't know. More so than probably any other section of the entire Bible, the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles are not an easy read today. First Chronicles, you know what? I will save the introduction to Chronicles until later, because all we're going to read of Chronicles today is so annoying. It's so annoying. All we're going to read of Chronicles today is this section about Saul's death. So this is First Chronicles 10. It's another account of Saul's death. Basically contains the same information as what we just read in 1 Samuel 31, with a little bit of a different spin on it. I will explain more about the purpose of the books of Chronicles a little bit later. But this is the point where we're going to start not necessarily reading through the sections in straight order in which they're arranged in our bindings of the Bible today. Can't just... Okay, fine. Give me... Alright, give it... Come on, give it to me. You go chase after that thing. This is 1 Chronicles 10. Now, the first 9 chapters, as I said, of 1 Chronicles are all genealogies. We'll talk about those maybe later. It's going to be tough to actually read those in the video, but we'll get to those at some point. I'll explain more about the books of Chronicles later, but right now we're just going to read 1 Chronicles 10. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him. Excuse me. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified, and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. You didn't bring me anything to throw, cat. You're just kind of here to pester and annoy me. I'd throw it if you brought it to me, but you didn't bring it to me to throw. What are you looking at me like that for? When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died, and all his house died together. And there's a difference right there. This is one of those little subtle differences between Chronicles and the other books, Samuel in this case. In the Samuel, it reads, Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together the same day. Here it says his house died together that day, meaning his dynasty died. He actually has one son left who is going to factor into the story for a bit longer still. But Saul's dynasty, his claim to the kingship, effectively died that day. When all the Israelites in the valley saw the army had fled, and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. Excuse me. They stripped him and took his head and his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news among their idols and their people. They put his armor in the temple of their gods, and hung up his head in the temple of Dagon. When all the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard of everything the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men went and took the bodies of Saul and his sons and brought them to Jabesh. Then they burned their bones under the great tree, buried, in this case it says buried, their bones. And now, rather than 1 Samuel, they burned the bodies and then buried the bones. Here we skip the whole burying the bodies part. Then they buried the bones under the great tree in Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. Here's a little postscript that we didn't read in Samuel. Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He did not keep the word of the Lord, and even consulted a medium for guidance, which you read about in 1 Samuel. We don't read about that in 1 Chronicles. We do read about that in Samuel. And did not inquire of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death, and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. So the chronicler is pretty specific in saying that the Lord put Saul to death. He says it outright. It wasn't just circumstances. It wasn't Satan. It wasn't an evil spirit. It was the Lord. The Lord was the one who put Saul to death. We don't really like to think of God in the context of putting people to death, but he does. He did then, and he still does now. There comes a point, Saul reached the end of his rope by this point. I don't know what would have happened. Now, Saul had lost the kingship back when he disobeyed God in regards to the Amalekites, and even before that when he offered the sacrifices at Gilgal before Samuel got there. He had lost his claim to the kingship because of those incidents. But I don't know what would have happened if he had accepted that and simply made room for David. Would God have forgiven him? I mean, God would not have restored him to the kingship. But if Saul had repented, sincerely, genuinely repented, instead of trying, after the Amalekite incident, and Samuel told him that God had taken the kingdom from him, he still pressed Samuel in making a public appearance with him to give the impression to the people that everything was okay and everything was fine. If he hadn't done that, if he had accepted God's judgment on him to no longer be king, and had gone back to live as he had before, could he have been forgiven? Could he have avoided the calamitous outcome for himself and his family? I don't know. That didn't happen. That's not what happened. So I don't know what would have happened if Saul had had a better attitude. He wouldn't have continued being king. God had made up his mind that Saul was no longer going to be king. But would he have been allowed to continue living in peace if he had sincerely repented and turned away from his own pride? I think so, but I don't know. It didn't happen, so we'll never know. But the Lord is the one who put him to death. In the end, we read about that all the way back with Judah in Genesis 38. Judah's wicked sons. He has wicked sons, and the Lord puts them to death. It's like in the books of Ruth and Naomi, the books of Ruth and Job, I should say. No, Naomi and Job in those books are saying that God did this to them. Like, no one is disputing that God brought upon these misfortunes on them. The question is why. It's like what was, what did Job do or did not do or whatever to bring about this calamity from God on him or Naomi? Why did God make Naomi's life bitter? I mean, the question there is kind of why, but there's no question of who did it. It was God who did it. It's like they all fully attributed these circumstances to God. And so God is in control of the bad as well as the good. And we like today to put a lot of emphasis on Satan and saying that Satan is doing these things or Satan is responsible for these things. And there is more emphasis on Satan in the New Testament than there is in the Old. But even Satan ultimately, we saw in Job, even Satan ultimately has to come to God and get permission to do whatever it is he's going to do. So whatever Satan does ultimately is done with under the jurisdiction and with the approval of God. And the Old Testament is pretty clear about that.